Okay, welcome everyone to the Multi-Region Co-op Spotlight Series titled Writing a Solicitation. This is fully focused on formally procured bids. So we are going to be talking about RFPs, request for proposals, or an IFB, which is an invitation for bid. But we are really going to be talking about what I call the foundational pieces of a solicitation. So let's get started. In usual fashion, I always include my about slide. As you all know me, I am Carrie Warnick. I am the program coordinator for Multi-Region Purchasing Cooperative. And as you know, my trainings are for everyone in the state that needs this training. So if you are not in this co-op, please welcome to the trainings. And for those of you that are our members, thank you always for attending my trainings. Now, what are we going to cover today? We are going to talk about the components of a formal bid. We are going to talk about standard terms and conditions as well as special terms and conditions and what's the difference. We're going to look at federal and state certifications. What are some needed attachments in your solicitations and where do you find all these resources? And you know me, I'm all about the easy buttons, so I will be sharing a lot of super easy buttons with you guys today. All right. Writing a solicitation, and I know this can be daunting. I have shared documents with several of you in the past, and I know it feels like a massive amount of work to create a formal bid. And I am a big believer in templates. I work from already set documents that I literally piece together depending on the type of the bid that MRPC is releasing. So I encourage you to set yourself up with something in that fashion to make your life easier. So what is a solicitation? It is basically making a request for something you want or need, documenting your need. Now, an effective solicitation will not only provide detailed specifications, and that can be for products, food or non-food, equipment, and even services, such as your kitchen repair services, maybe you're doing a sanitation system services. So it's any type of a bid. Appropriate procurement method. Obviously, we are talking about formal procurement method today. In the entire document, you're clearly describing your deliverables, and that encompasses a lot of things. And of course, an effective solicitation is going to comply with federal, state, and local requirements. Now, there are components to a formal solicitation. First, you want to have this introduction letter. Who are you? Who does a potentially interested vendor contact if they've got questions, they want the bid documents, maybe where do they go to get the bid documents? All these things that you want to put into an introduction letter. And don't worry, we are going to look at samples today, so those are forthcoming. Obviously, you're going to have some special terms and conditions, and those can change based on the type of bid you are putting out. For example, I have 4 or 5 templates for special terms and conditions that I utilize because there are certain things that are specific to, say, my food bid, but aren't really applicable to an equipment bid. Not that we've done an equipment bid. We did do a milk cooler bid this year. That was a lot of fun. But there are specific things around installation of equipment that wouldn't go in a food bid. So special terms are really kind of bid specific and also district specific. In your special terms, you're going to outline the bid timeline. You're going to outline your delivery times. Special things that are really specific to your district. Then you've got standard terms and conditions. Now, standard terms and conditions is the bulk of your terms and conditions. These are your foundational terms and conditions, things that are required by USDA, by TDA, and even maybe state, such as Texas Education Code, terms that you have to have in your solicitation. These are pretty much standard in every single bid that I release for multi-region co-op, and they should be in bids that you're releasing at your district if you are doing formal solicitations. These don't change a whole lot. I do review our standard terms and conditions every year to make sure that they are still compliant, and if anything has changed in guidance, I need to update something. My standard terms and conditions do go through legal counsel for review. That happens every couple of years just to make sure that what we're putting out in our solicitations is still compliant. So it's really the beef of the solicitation, the standard terms and conditions. And then of course you're going to have some kind of an evaluation matrix or a rubric explaining how does a vendor get evaluated, what are you looking at, what are the points they can win, and total points, all that good stuff. Then you've got all this extra stuff that goes in, right? So you've got federal and state certifications and affidavits. And between the two of those, it's a pretty hefty list. Quite a few things that vendors are required to agree to and initial and check off and say, yes, we understand that we are signing up for a potential award in a governmental contract, because that's what these are. Other components of a solicitation are attachments. Again, you can have several attachments. First, you need to provide a scope of bid, and these are your specifications, the products you're going out for, whether it's food, non-food, equipment, or maybe your scope of services you're seeking is all about a company coming in for repairs or a company coming in once a month for sanitation systems. So it could be a variety of things. Then you need to include a scope of delivery area. You've got possibly multiple campus locations, or maybe you've got a single warehouse and this is just a single direct drop. You want to include a form for vendor references. And I always recommend getting references from schools. So if the vendor can provide you with minimum 3 references, I think minimum and maximum, if you start tasking them for too many references, it becomes a bit overwhelming. But shoot for 3 and cross your fingers you can get 2. The reason I say schools is because you want to follow up on references with entities like yourself. Have they been servicing schools? Do they understand driving up to a school campus? What's it required? They've got a good reference coming back on them, then hopefully you're looking at a responsible and responsive vendor that's good for school food service. If you've got a bid for food products, you must include a Buy American justification form. That has to be an attachment. It requires the vendors to provide a list of products that don't meet the Buy American provision. In Texas, you're required to capture the details of country of origin. Now, that is not a USDA requirement, that is a TDA requirement. And their justification. There are only 3 reasons for justifying non-domestic. Either it's not available as US grown, like bananas and kiwis, mangoes, maybe it's limited quantity, or maybe it's cost reasonable. In your form, your attachment in this bid, you've got to include a column where the vendor must enter the domestic cost if they were to purchase that domestically, if cost reasonable is being used. So that has to be included as an attachment. Delivery fees. You need an attachment about delivery fees. Does the vendor require a minimum number of cases per drop? Or do they require a minimum amount be spent with them, such as $150 per order per drop? Do they have tiered pricing? So you're ordering more cases, the delivery fee maybe goes up or down. And do they charge a fuel surcharge? We've seen a lot more of that coming into place since COVID, and we're still seeing it come through on some bids. So something to be very aware of. Those delivery fees can really make or break an award, because if you're looking at pricing, you may have a vendor that has best pricing, but their delivery fee is off the charts. That raises your end price. So all of that has to be a consideration in your evaluation and award process. And then I always include what's called a no proposal response form. Why is this important? Well, If you've invited a vendor to the bidding table, and you've probably reached out to a few that you know of, you've advertised your bid, right? So there are going to be a variety of vendors looking at your documents. If a vendor that you think is a viable vendor decides not to respond, you want to know why. Is it something in your bid? Was it too restrictive? Was the timeline too short? Is the volume too large? If you're a really large district, you may have to break up your campuses into areas that helps you capture multiple bids from maybe a variety of distributors or vendors. That opens up the competition to small companies and large companies. If you're like Multi-Region Co-op, we have several bids that have pricing areas because of that, because we are so spread out. We can't expect one vendor to service all of our districts. So learning more about why vendors don't bid will help you. Sometimes the volume just may be too large. They're a smaller company and they just simply couldn't handle it. Sometimes the volume is too low, which might force you to review your estimated quantities on certain specified products. And do you have a diluted list of products where maybe you've got several of the same type item that you could consolidate into one item? So great information can come from a vendor who isn't going to bid and telling you why. Also, if you don't get any responses, this becomes very important. Or if you get one response, those forms become very important. I've had situations where we received one response on a very large distributor bid. And when I reached out to the other two distributors that I thought for sure were going to bid, what they shared, if I would have rebid, would not have changed their response. So this can become some very great documentation that is backup to awarding a single distributor or a single vendor if they are the only bidder. So we're going to look at one of those today. All right, let's jump into just general conversation about terms and conditions. We're going to go through some slides, but then I've got some resources for you and some examples for you. And by the end of this, I think you guys are going to be loving me today. I'm just going to say it. I'm sure Diana's laughing right now. So terms and conditions. We've got our standard terms and conditions. And as you heard me mention before, these are your foundation terms that can be used in any formal bid, no matter what type of product you're going out for. They basically outline the rules that you and the vendor adhere to once that contract is awarded. So these are just your base rules. It's hefty. I'll be honest, in my standard terms and conditions, I have 91 itemized terms. It's probably what makes vendors go blind. Special terms and conditions are a little more bid specific to the timeline and the type of bid. And I know I talked about this earlier, but both standard terms and special terms become part of the big contract. These are all the rules that the vendor must adhere to, that you're expecting them to step up to that plate. They've made promises to follow all of those rules and regulations as they have agreed when they accept your award offer. So standard, your basic stuff, special, bid, district specific. Now, when it comes to certifications, and there are quite a few, USDA for the federal certifications requires a very specific list that must be included in your formal procurement method. And the bidders must address each of those certifications and agree to most of them. Well, there might be on the federal, all of them. And this is if they want to be part of a governmental bid. Texas, a little bit different. I think there's a couple of certifications that we'll talk about in a minute that a vendor may not agree to, and that's okay. However, these certifications must be included in your solicitation. I have given you the site where you can find those. That is in the CFR, which is your Code of Federal Regulations. It is in Part 2 or 2 CFR, Part 200 in the appendix. I've given you a link to the electronic CFR. It'll take you right to Part 2 on the slide deck. And as you know, I share the slide deck in the Procurement Tools or Spotlight Series folder. So that is always there for you. If you don't have a link bookmarked for the eCFR, I highly encourage you to, after this training, go to this slide and click on that link and save that, because it's very easy to go and look up various things in that whole section of the CFR that child nutrition must follow. So be aware of where you find your guidance, especially on the federal side. Now, with state certifications, obviously you're going to find those in TDA's Administrator Reference Manual, the ARM, Section 17 for procurement. Now, yes, there are specific certifications that you must have in your bids and an affidavit. So state requires that you have a notary of public, or you should, I don't know if it's required, but you should have a notary of public requirement in your bid, so that once all those certifications are signed, some of the last pages that that vendor is going to fill out is all their specific information, sign in a couple of places, verifying that they have read through the entire solicitation, they agree to all the terms and conditions, and they have it notarized. That is so important. Now, MRPC went to electronic bidding, which I know some of you do utilize some e-bid software. We're pretty much paper free. Everything is done electronically. No vendor has to mail anything into us or submit anything via email, none of that. However, I do require a physical signature on one page of the entire solicitation. Everything else will accept a digital signature. I use a lot of Adobe fillable forms so that vendors can just open up the solicitation documents, fill in the cells that are asking for the information, digitally sign, and move on. I am very pro not utilizing a bunch of paper and ink, because that can become very cumbersome. However, the option for vendors to print all that stuff out and physically fill it out is always an option. So your district may have a variety of rules around how you gather bid responses. And so you're going to need to obviously follow district policy. But there are multiple ways to go about that. Now, I do have some documents that you're going to love for the federal and state certifications. And what I will tell you about these two documents when we look at them is a few years ago, pre-COVID, I participated on a subcommittee through a Nourish to Flourish summit, and it was all about creating a standardized document for the federal certifications. And it was a committee of all types of industry partners from all over the US. And we worked diligently to come up with the list that it doesn't matter where your school district sits in the US. They are the federal certifications that are required you have in your formal procurement method. I do check for updates every year on those, but once we created that document with links to the actual site of that certification, and those do get checked every year, I then duplicated that format for the state certifications. So it's two different documents. You literally can grab them and just drop them right into your solicitation package. No need to recreate that wheel. We're going to look at those here in a minute. All right. So where are your resources? Where can you find reference documents? So let's take a look at some options. But the one thing that I want you to take away today is don't recreate the wheel. There are so many options out there to grab and use as a reference, copy and paste, whatever that looks like. There's no reason at this point in time to kill yourself writing a formal solicitation document, because there's just too much out there available. It's been done already thousands of times over. And I will be honest that I have borrowed and taken certain things from a variety of people across the US, different co-ops that use different things, or another school district I was associated with, to build all this, because I work hard, but I don't want to work too hard, right? Okay, on this slide right here, there is a link to the MRPC Procurement Tools Google folder, where all of these documents that I'm about to show you are housed. And that is open to anyone in the state. I am completely transparent and don't mind who wants to take what. So let me get out of this, and I'm just going to kind of start one by one as we've talked about through the slides, and look at some of these documents to give you some references. And let me show you in that folder, let me get this open. In the procurement tools folder, I did a little bit of housekeeping and rearranging of things this morning. And let me show you what it looks like. Now, you've got the link in the slideshow, but if you're a member and have access on the website, you can come here to the main folder. It's just called Procurement Tools. However, I share the link with anyone who wants it without going to all these other folders. But here's the changes I made. So there are lots of different types of documents in this folder. And of course, solicitation, resources, templates, references, whatever you want to call them, were also kind of intermixed with all these other documents. And I have now pulled them all into a single folder called Solicitation Reference Documents. So many of the documents I'm going to show you here in the next half hour, and questions are welcome. Please, if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask, are now under this new folder inside that Procurement Tools folder. All right. So let's start with our cover letter. Okay, what should that look like? Well, number one, it should be dated with the first day that your bid is released. It should state who you are and the title of your solicitation. If you've got internal RFP or IFB number, you want to include that. You want to include the title of the solicitation. Then you want to explain, what are you seeking? What are you doing? And how are you doing it? Is this the bid going through an electronic software? Or do the potential bidders need to reach out directly to a person? Who is that person? What is their contact information, a phone number, their email? How does a vendor go about getting the bid documents? So this cover letter serves a lot of purposes. Now, I always include the timeline in the cover letter, but I've also got it in my special terms and conditions. So they get it twice, but if you're going to hold a pre-bid bidders conference, you're going to outline that. Where, when, what time, location, how do they attend that? I actually ended up doing pre-recorded videos because some of our bids are rather large and a lot of attendees, and many couldn't make it. You know, time is precious. And so they have found this to be very helpful. They can watch it at midnight if they want, on their own time. And there's always some way that we have set up for questions, and you will need to do that as well. If you are not using an eBid software and a vendor has a question, whether it's about something in your written solicitation, something about the specified products, whatever it's about, there needs to be that transparency that if a vendor asks a question and you are going to answer it, what's the process and how will that be made public? So maybe you've got a living frequently asked questions along with your responses on the district website. If your eBid software supports something like that, which ours does, we use Bonfire, and all questions go through Bonfire. And once we answer, every vendor that's logged in gets the answer to that person's question. They see the question and the answer, but you want that transparency, because if one vendor is thinking it or asking it, probably another vendor is also thinking and wanting to ask that question. You want to outline when your bid opens. Legal notices, when do those run? What are the dates? When does it close? When is that due date? And then, of course, if you're going to have a public bid opening. Now, an IFB requires a bid opening. An RFP does not. It is optional. And the reason for that is an IFB, you're typically looking for the best price, and hopefully you can announce the bid winner right there at the bid opening. Sometimes there's a tie. Sometimes you may need 2 or 3 days to review alternate products offered, but an IFB is really about who gave the best price that can get it to your back door. RFP is a little more involved, utilizes a more lengthy evaluation method, and it's sealed, but the minute you receive an RFP, you can open that bid response. And if there are any missing documents, you could reach out to that vendor and say, hey, we didn't get your W-9, or you didn't get this. With an IFB, it's completely sealed and cannot be opened until the day of your public bid opening. So one of the main differences between those two types of formal bid procurement. So you're just basically in your cover letter describing, what is this bid about? Who are we? Who do you contact? How do you get the documents? And so forth. Just a general overview. I wouldn't keep it any longer than 1 page. So kind of short and sweet, right? So that's the cover letter. All right. So now let's take a look at, where did I go? Well, I'm going to start with this nifty document that I've created for everyone. And yes, you can see my face. Maybe you can see I'm feeling proud. So one of the things I have always done is share copies of our solicitation as a reference to districts, but it is full of MRPC, cooperative member language, and I have taken our standard terms and conditions and our special terms and conditions, and I have placed them into an Excel spreadsheet, and it is organized this way. First, I went ahead and in the order that these items appear in our solicitations, that has a number as 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 91. Then I've given the heading of the item, the term as it is written, and sample language. Now this is directly out of the MRPC solicitation, but I have gone through every single one of these terms and removed anything about Region 10, multi-region co-op, or cooperative members. And I replaced that with purchasing entity. So you can also take this spreadsheet if you wanted to sort this in alphabetical order to make it easier, but take this document, it's in the procurement tools folder, and use it. Use it as a reference, steal the language, tweak the language. It's written for you, right? And as I mentioned before, don't recreate the wheel. Some of your resources are co-ops or even colleague schools, your neighboring schools or colleagues that you've come in contact with that have a confirmed solicitation that had no findings. That is your best resource. It's a great starting point. So I've created this template that should make it really easy to pull in everything that you would want to add to your standard terms and conditions. Now, I will tell you that all of this stuff in here is required either by federal, by state, or even, well, not really locally. You may have some things locally that your district wants you to put into standard terms and conditions, and that would be really specific to your district. But that also might be something to consider for your special terms and conditions. But all of these things, if you were to review the CFR or the ARM, you're going to see where you need to include language regarding all these things. And I'm calling them things, they're terms, they're all your terms. But as you see, I scroll through, some of these terms can be pretty hefty. You may want to come in and obviously, you're going to read through this whole thing, obviously. But some of these things you may need to change. Some may be right on, but this is pretty much covering the gamut. There may be some things that don't apply to the type of bid that you plan to release. I am included everything possible. And so I don't see this as something that you're going to just copy everything and paste it, because you may not be using market basket method. You may not be allowing price changes or adjustments, which I hope you do, because we're still at a state, and I think it's going to last a little while, if not forever, that vendors are starting to not respond to bids that don't have some type of language that allows for a pricing adjustment that is out of their control. And we're seeing more and more that that is why some of these vendors are not responding to bids, that they can't feel locked into a whole year of fixed firm pricing. And if you're not allowing some type of adjustability, then you might be getting higher pricing than what you could be getting if you did allow for some flexibility in pricing. So just little things to consider when you're putting together your solicitation. What kind of flexibilities are you willing to allow that might make for best pricing and more responses? Obviously, you want to address all kinds of things. Product substitutions. How do you want the vendor to handle those? I mean, these are your contract terms. Once you evaluate and award a vendor, these become the terms of the contract that you're going to hold them to and that you lean on if something's not going quite right, but that you also have to follow. And I say that because this week I am assisting a district in a bit of a situation with a vendor, and it's a performance issue. And I can only take so much action until we have exhausted what's in our terms and conditions, what's in the contract. So as much as this is how the vendor is expected to behave and follow these sets of terms, so are you, the purchasing entity or the releaser of the bid. So as you can see, I did state 91 terms in my standard terms and conditions. Some things may not apply. Now, if you're doing a solicitation for equipment, you don't need to include Buy American provision because it's a non-edible product. Same with chemicals or small wares or anything you're doing that is a non-food. So there may be some terms that don't really apply to the bid, you know, but for the most part, it is all encompassing and ready to be taken and used if you want it. Now, same with special terms. I did include an extra column with this list on what type of a bid would you possibly want to use these special terms in. So, you know, some of the terms, your purpose of bid, the types of goods, the term of the contract, obviously it's going to be specific to the bid you're releasing, the timeline, yet again, just to remind them, how they submit the documents. Some of you may be requiring limited entry. Now, most bids in your specifications, you're going to include maybe a recommended manufacturer, maybe a recommended product code or a model number if it's equipment. You're always going to include the words or equal if you're doing that, which allows a vendor to maybe offer up that specific specified product and maybe an alternate brand or less expensive food product that might create a cost savings. So if you don't limit how many alternates that they can submit, you may get 3 or 4, which could be overwhelming in an evaluation. So we do limit how many entries for alternate options vendors can input into our eBid software. If you're not using eBid software that has that option, it might be something you set up in an Excel spreadsheet, however you want that to work. But getting too many options and too many bids like that could probably make you feel a little crazy. How does a vendor withdraw? Can they, if they've already submitted the bid? Opening delivery. Are you requiring a minimum delivery once a week to each campus? Do you need a daily delivery to one of those campuses? What does that look like? Now, in your scope of delivery, when you list all your campuses, that might be great information to include. Number of deliveries per week, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got some schools that need 5-day delivery on milk, others once a week. So each one of your campuses might be different. You want to detail that out, obviously. You may require annual reporting. It may be a bid that requires special things like safety data sheets. If it's chemicals, obviously, or if it's food, you want those labels and signed CN product analyses, all kinds of things that you might want to put into the special terms and conditions. Again, I removed everything R10 MRPC and cooperative members. So purchasing entity is throughout this language to make it really easy to use as a resource. So trying to pretty much cover everything. This, past year we saw milk go to escalator bids. So I've got great language around how that works, escalation or de-escalation based on raw milk. I did a quarterly pricing adjustment bid with small wares and chemicals and laid that out. So there are many things to consider when putting your solicitations together. And the one thing you want to think about is, number one, you want to capture enough responses, and you want to capture responsible and responsive vendors, and you want the best pricing on the products that you really need. So building into your solicitation the language that's going to allow those vendors an easy time to offer up what you want at their very best price, whatever that looks like, without creating a ton of work for you or for them, you're going to get the best successful responses. When I was preparing the produce bid this coming school year, I talked to 2 different produce vendors because we've always done weekly pricing, and it seemed very cumbersome, not only for them to be putting out to us, but for us to keep up. During your reviews, you maybe had to pull 4 or 5 different, or I guess up to 3 pricing lists so that it would match up to the invoice that you had submitted. It just felt all very heavy. And vendors are great resources to have a conversation with. And after I talked with the produce vendors, they said, you should really go to monthly pricing. And this is how it should work, because this is how we price our produce. And it's less work for us to do a weekly. If we go to a monthly, which means less labor costs. They kind of laid it out for me. And so I changed the structure of the produce bid, and it's worked out very nicely. And the cost is not going to be less or more or anything crazy compared to a weekly price. But other resources are vendors when you have a conversation with them. The one thing I will remind you of is that when you're putting together your solicitation and the language or the written specifications, if a vendor helps you write those specifications, that vendor cannot respond to your bid. And I say this because it cropped up last year like crazy, and it was really centered around equipment. And I think there was an equipment broker that was offering up written specifications for pieces of equipment and telling schools, here, use that in your bid. But you just can't do that, because when I helped the district and I reviewed the written solicitation, it had all kinds of brand names in the solicitation. It had trademark stuff. It was not good. It was not, first off, it wasn't a good written specification because it wasn't going to allow for free and open competition. The other thing is that even though the broker is not the manufacturer, they've written a specification based on the equipment they rep. And so they're wanting their vendors to win the bid because they're going to get paid better, probably, or a commission off of that. So they have a vested interest in obviously having their vendor win the bid. That's collusion. So you can't go down that path. Now, what you can do, if you've got a product specification sitting in front of you that you did not write, you can certainly take that information and rewrite it in your own words and take out brand names, take out trademark stuff, and basically extrapolate what you need to write a really nice, solid specification that you wrote, piece together, whatever that looks like. But then that allows anyone to bid that bid because it's something you created yourself. So just be really careful when others offer to write your specifications, unless there's someone who has no vested interest whatsoever to win the bid award. That's really, that is really key. Okay, any questions so far? I'm not seeing anything pop up in chat. You guys are just hanging in there, right? Okay, moving on. Let's talk about these 2 documents, the federal certifications document, and then we're going to look at the state certifications document. This is where this all began. This is the federal certifications. And when I was on the subcommittee, we talked about what's coming out of the CFR Part 200, what's coming out of other parts of the CFR or food and nutrition, what's required in the way of vendors must certify they agree to all of these terms, basically, in order to enter into a governmental contract, right? It does include a link that takes you right to that particular certification in the CFR, or if it's outside of the Part 200, then it's also got a link to that, or maybe it's to an appendix to something in the CFR. So it's all here. These get checked every year. I go through and make sure the links are still working and that they take you to the correct place on the internet, because as we know, things change, right? This is like the list of what the vendor is going to find. If they want to read more about any of these certifications, they can just simply click on the link and it takes them right there. As they go through, the way we set up the document is, and I took it, it was a Word document, but I've turned it into a fillable form. And I will tell you, this is in the procurement tools folder, and nothing throughout this document says R10 MRPC, even in the foot or the, whatever this is called, nothing about MRPC. So there are form fields that the vendor just steps in, open it in Adobe Acrobat and fill it out, and it explains. The only place on this document for you, the purchasing entity, is you will enter the closing date and the closing site. So I thought that said closing date on both lines. I think I need my eyes checked. Anyway, so you're gonna obviously drop that in before you insert this page into a solicitation. But as you'll notice, not only these are going to follow the order as that first page does, but you've also got the notation up here, the reference of one, and then at the bottom of each page, and each page for the most part is a certification, the link appears a second time. So if they're on page 10 or 15, they don't have to scroll all the way back to the top. They can simply click on the link and be taken right to that site. You'll see that there are places to check. A yes, oh, this is the word version. Sorry, I've got it in a fillable form. If you want it in a fillable form, let me know, because I do have it. These are places where the vendor is going to check, yes, they agree, an initial. If they check no, they might need to give you an explanation, or it might be something you need to follow up on. Each one has its own page. For insurance, there is a sample as an exhibit only, and it is stated as such. But you can see it's all very neatly organized. Just this whole document, you just pull it right out of that folder and insert it into your solicitation packet. Same for the state regulations. So I liked this format so much, and I like the usability of it. It allows a vendor to just go through it and check, yes, they agree, hopefully. If there's something they don't agree to, obviously, we're going to follow up on that. It's just organized. It gives them the link to where they can read further about each certification, even though each one does have a brief explanation. So when I talk about they may not agree to certain things, I think there is one in the state certifications, and I want to say it's a Texas family code that we have seen vendors not agree to. And, that is a district decision. I'm trying to find it. Oh, here it is. So it's all about child support. And I have seen some vendors not agree because maybe it doesn't apply to them. And so that's just a due diligence that you would want to follow up on. If you get anything in your solicitation into a response to your bid that someone wants to change your contract language, they don't agree to some certification, that's up to you to follow up with. Do you accept a non-agreement? Is that okay? You can let that one go. The important thing is that you include it in your bid. and they were required to say yes or no. And if you've got to do a follow-up, you'll document that as well. Seems like I had a school this past year that someone didn't agree to Texas Family Code, and we had to talk about it. But again, same thing with the federal document here. It is set up, nothing with MRPC, and they've got the links at the bottom of each one. Now with Texas certifications, get to the bottom here, there is a non-collusion declaration, and they are required to get this notarized for that signature. And then there is also a signature and declaration of compliance page. So this goes through the agreement. They are required to fill this whole section out, and this is the one page that requires a physical signature in the multi-region bid package. Now, your district may have a policy that they've got to sign in all places with a pen. That may be a local policy, but so far TDA does not have any issue with digital signatures. They are looking for everything you have in your solicitation is exactly what you should have in your solicitation, and you've crossed the T's and dotted the I's. And then obviously that signature needs a notary of public. Now, if there are other names throughout the solicitation package in the certifications, each person's name that appears in these pages, it does require a notary of public. So if they've got 2 or 3 people that have eyes and putting their names on certain pages, then those people will need to be notarized as well. Okay, what else can I show you? Any questions so far? Anyone got any questions? No? Okay. I'm going to talk about this no renewal or no response form. I put this in every single one of my bids, even the renewal bid. And it just kind of looks like this. It asks them to check why did they not bid? Because if they're not bidding, I need to understand why, especially if it's a renewal. I did have this happen one year where a ice cream vendor did not renew. And actually 2 years in a row, we've had ice cream vendors not renew. One was because they lost their ice cream freezer and it was too costly to replace, and they decided to step out of that business. Prior to that, it was a company that just simply stopped servicing K-12 food service. So, these are things that become documentation. If I'd only gotten one response and I discovered, okay, one vendor doesn't do this anymore, one vendor couldn't continue anymore, that might allow me just to document and award the one vendor that did bid. Or it might be something that tells me, hey, your time frame for responding was way too short. We couldn't put it together. Well, I need to review what kind of time frame did I allow for bidding? Was it too short? Or some other reason. It gives you great documentation, and I encourage you to have something in your bids that allows a vendor to share why maybe they don't respond. I've even sent these to vendors like, hey, you didn't send in the no response form. I need to know why. I get a little pushy, but it gives you great communication about what's going on with a vendor and potentially why you're not seeing them come through. Now, cost analysis. If you attended the previous session this week, we talked about planning and forecasting and creating a cost analysis. And as you know, TDA is going to ask for those during your review, but I include this form in my bid package. This becomes part of my solicitation. And the reason it's important is that it lets the potential vendors know what is the value of this contract. How much business can they win? Now, if you're splitting it, or you've got 80% going to a primary vendor, 20% is a backup vendor or a secondary vendor, whatever that looks like, you might want to explain it here in this section. Or if you come up with your own form. Now, I actually created this part of the form, but I can't remember where I found this part of the form, but this is where you go through and you're going to check off what kind of purchasing this expenditure is being made under. So it could be a variety of things. There may be even something that I don't have in this list. I can't remember where I got this, but anyway, it just gives those bidders extra information. But I also give this to TDA when they're reviewing our cooperative solicitation documents, because it shows that I was following through with my due diligence. I'm being very transparent with the vendors on what is the level of business they can win, what's that contract value. But it also then becomes my reminder as I'm watching what the co-op is spending throughout the school year. Are we getting too close to our contract value? Do we have wiggle room to add items per our solicitation language? And I do always have language for additional items in the bid, and you'll see that in that spreadsheet. But I open these up all the time like, oh, what was that contract value? Because I've got it in 1 page or 2 pages. So it makes it for easy reference, look back and see, you know, what did we estimate on this thing? All right, I think that's what I've got for showing you everything. As you know where to find the procurement tools folder, and the link is on the slide deck. Any questions? You guys have any special situations you want to ask? We've got maybe 8 more minutes before the end of this training. Anything coming through? You know, I try to hand you the easy tool as often as I can, because your job's already hard enough, and we are aware of that. And not many of you do formal solicitations, and probably if you are, it's a lot of it is for equipment. I have a contact in another co-op in another state, and they run their co-op a little differently. It was really interesting. I was in a meeting with them. They don't do the bids, but they provide the bid package to their members, and then the members do their own bids. But she made a comment that she has this full list of all this equipment, the equipment specifications. I'm like, I need that. My members need that. So I'm working on getting that list of equipment specifications. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, you'll see another document land in that solicitation reference doc folder. Probably most of you have already spent all your excess funds on equipment and you're done. You're like, we don't need it anymore, but someone might need it out there. You never know. All right, I've got a comment. Yeah, so a comment that from Teresa Wilson, that she had to do an RFP this past spring and was able to use something previously created. It does make your life easier, because why would you recreate the wheel, right? I mean, these things have been done 1,000 times over. And honestly, I have a pretty loud voice when I'm at conferences about standardization and modernization of bidding. And one aspect of the future of bidding is really about, we need a standard federal certifications form that every school across the US is using. That it doesn't matter if a manufacturer is answering to a California school or a Texas school, that form is exactly the same, because we all have to have that same set of certifications in our bids. Standard terms. Every school across the US utilizing standard terms. There are federal standard terms everyone has to have in their bid. Why don't we have a form for that? It doesn't matter where you sit in the US, you've got to have those same terms. So I'm really trying to push that needle to get to that place. One of the challenges we had with the federal certifications was finding someone to house that document. And the conversation is about who's going to keep up with this document. And who knows, you know, I'm far away from retirement, but I just might have a website someday that allows you to go click, download federal certifications, click, download standard terms. What state are you in? Click, download that for state certifications. I'm working on it. So anyway, the more we talk about it, the more we push for it, the better chance we have of making that happen. That makes everyone's life easier in managing all this procurement method requirements. All right, well, I've got 5 minutes. If you guys have any questions, or you want to present maybe something that challenged you, and we can maybe briefly talk about it. Otherwise, that's what I've got. I've given you the wheel. So take advantage of it. It's why it's there. And it's what I love doing. So, all right, I'm not seeing anything come through. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending this training. I hope you're enjoying them, not taking up too much of your time. And I will have this recording up on the MRPC YouTube channel by the end of today. And I will get the slide deck loaded into the Spotlight Series folder. So for those of you that want to grab it, it's always a PDF form, and you can toggle between speaker notes and the actual slide. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. 2 more trainings coming up next week. It'll be the last 2 of the Spotlight series, and then into October, and more discussions on forecasting. That's coming up for sure with Maestro. Okay, bye everyone. Have a great afternoon. I'll play a little music until 2:30, so enjoy.